How we doing? IB Nation Sports Talk up and running along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. It is Notre Dame. It is USA victory over Iran Day, right? Like,
Yeah, that's what we're going to celebrate today.
that's right. That's right. Salty had us counting down, ready to go. The U.S. wins 1-0 in the World Cup, a tense one. It sounded like they scored the only goal in the first half, right? I didn't see the whole thing. I've just kind of
Yeah, so they scored in the first half. Pulisic put one in and a crosser, took a shot to the abdomen and actually had to be taken to the hospital from the
that I
match.
heard about.
And then, yeah, second half came out. It seemed like there was a concerted effort to maybe be on the defense a little bit more. And things got really a lot closer than I think a lot of people would have hoped towards the end. Iran had, a couple shots on goal that were pretty close. And in that situation, if Iran ties it, they're going on. And so the U.S. had to win that game. They couldn't give up any type of goal. It was just really nice to see them move on, though, after not making it 4 years ago. They're back to the knockout stage. They're going to play the Netherlands this Saturday. So a great matchup, and now it's single elimination. So really excited and hoping that they can continue to go on. But it's going to be tough. They've only scored 2 goals in these 3 games. That's going to be the biggest question is, how are they going to keep up the production?
Yep. Well, they won, though. That's all that matters at this point. They're down to, I believe it's the quarterfinals, right? Like the final 16?
16, yes.
Yeah. I don't know if that's quarters or not, but yeah, in any case. Salty talking to you. There's a white furred animal roaming around behind you. He hopes this is not unexpected news.
Yes. So Henry's mom just got home, so I'm sure he's very excited right now.
All right. So Henry's going crazy. All right. Hey, if you would hit that like button in YouTube. I saw some of the likes versus people waiting earlier. I mean, what are you waiting for? If you're sitting there waiting, hit the like button. You got nothing better to do at that point, right? And if you're in there already with us right now, just hit the like button. We appreciate it. And of course, rate, review, subscribe on wherever you get your podcast. We always appreciate it. So 1 year anniversary, Brian Kelly. We got a few different things that we're going to talk about today. As always, of course, rapid fire, we get a slew of different topics, but I thought it was notable, significant, whatever you want to call it. This is the 1 year anniversary that the news dropped that Brian Kelly was leaving Notre Dame for LSU. Do you remember your initial reaction when you heard the news?
Yeah, I mean, I was just a little shocked when it first came out. I saw it over, the internet, probably like most people on Twitter, and that's kind of how things, I feel like I found out about a lot of things now, is especially when it comes to sports, is Twitter, right? And so I guess I was shocked because I didn't even know that it was really an option, or that he was exploring that avenue. I knew that Brian Kelly had always kind of been in talks with various NFL teams, and I always thought that the NFL was going to be maybe his next move. I never thought he would leave and maybe go to another college school, and let alone just kind of, especially after the last 4 or 5 years went for him with all the 10-win seasons. So it was just shocking. It was kind of like the last thing I expected, I think, that day when it popped up.
Yeah, it seemed like the NFL stuff, like any NFL stuff you heard, was like almost like not really reliable, not believable. It almost seemed like stuff that was probably leaked by his agent or, like his own people, because you started hearing that, even after a not so great year. Oh, Brian Kelly, could there be NFL interest? Well, I don't think so. And, lo and behold, it didn't seem like there was. I don't know. But, the USC stuff is what popped, had been kind of following him. And I think Kirk Herbstreit had been, kind of saying that he thought that Kelly would, be a good fit for USC and all this different stuff to, to resurrect the program and all that. And LSU was just kind of like, it never seemed like, you weren't hearing anything about that. But then, boom, lo and behold, I was shocked to hear it, because again, I just felt like he had just built a new house here in town. It was year 12. He was in the midst of a successful run, only 1 loss last season, and they were still in college football playoff contention. And, we'll get to that here in a minute. most people probably won't admit it at this point because, like Mike S says, shocked and relieved all at the same time. Most people probably won't admit it. The initial outpouring, if you do remember, the initial outpouring was much more shock and dismay, like with the feeling of, oh no, we're losing Brian Kelly. It wasn't like good riddance, the initial stuff. The first few hours, those initial hours after the news came out that he was leaving, many more people were voicing, that kind of stuff, like concern, like, what are we going to do? What's this mean for, all that kind of stuff? Like you're losing, you know, whatever you thought about him, you were losing a good coach. And obviously LSU felt like they were getting a good coach. How did whatever your initial feeling was change, seeing the way things went down then, probably within the next 24 hours or so? Like you've got the team meeting the next morning, all that's, he's flying back into town the early morning, calls a 7 a.m. meeting and all that stuff. How did that kind of stuff affect how you felt about it?
Some of that shock turned into, not disgust sounds like a harsh word, but there was just a little, there was resentment and disgust with kind of the way that he ended things at Notre Dame because of how long he was here, the success that he had here, the college football playoff appearances, the national championship appearances, the 10-win seasons, all of it. And everything that kind of, built up him getting this LSU job. And whether, people want to say it or not, LSU from Notre Dame is a step up for him. I don't know. That's up to your personal, debate about what's a step up and what's a lateral movement. But for him, the money he was
feel
getting,
like it was a step up, but, money wise and otherwise he wouldn't have made the move.
Right. So this was, a step up for him. And so the thing that I had the most disgust with is I felt like he didn't recognize, honor, and thank, what he built at Notre Dame, because essentially that's what got him to the next spot, right? Like you don't go to a place, to LSU after, wherever you're at, unless you had success, and success is through your players. You can coach all you want, but the players are still doing it for you at the end of the day. They're the ones buying in. And so to show, to call a team meeting that early in the morning and then to, dip out after just a couple minutes, I felt like it wasn't there wasn't like a heartfelt, thank you. I appreciate my time here. I appreciate all the hard work that everyone put in, on my behalf. And because of this, I now have a better opportunity for myself and to go on to LSU. So I had a lot of disgust because of how he left things and the way he didn't, appreciate his players in the end.
Right. And the way the players obviously found out, and they had the app and, the whole text thing and everyone, it's like, you expect more. Now, I realize it can be hard, but, he was on the West Coast and all that stuff. I don't buy the whole timeline of events that all this took place within, like a 24-hour window as soon as the Stanford game was over, that all of a sudden, okay, Brian Kelly just got this offer, boom, now he's taken the head coaching job. The timeline had to have been more protracted than that. And for him, to essentially fly back into town, call this early morning meeting, stand up there, really just more or less make it about himself, because we saw the video that some of the whatever the players were, taped inside that room. And then for him, because the room that they did it in the main auditorium there at the Goog, it's kind of like a movie theater, excuse me, where you walk in at the ground level and then the players sit, kind of up in movie theater seating. And then his office, you go up the steps beside those seats. His office is up at the top, so he starts at the bottom. He gives his little, I'm leaving and, here's why it's good for me thing. And he leaves and you kind of see him looking over. I think he thought he was going to get some kind of standing ovation from the team that never came. And, so I think that when it all shook down, Brian Kelly was about Brian Kelly. It should be no surprise. And now look, he's not the first coach to pack up and take a job. He's not, it's not the first time. Obviously, he did it the exact same way, because part of the irony of this whole thing is mid-season, right after he breaks Knute Rockne's record to become Notre Dame's all-time winningest head coach, the next week he's got his old team, Cincinnati, coming into town. And every time something, he's being recognized for beating Wisconsin the week before at Soldier Field when he's at Notre Dame Stadium before the game. And a chorus of boos rain out from all the Cincinnati fans who are still ticked off for how they jilted him 12 years ago in the exact same fashion. So, And I think that you kind of sit back and you look at that as well. Like this guy did it twice in the exact same fashion to the last two places he was at. So I think that obviously skewed a lot of people's opinions in a hurry because again, there was a lot of goodwill early on, but then when the team finds out before he actually tells them and how he called this early meeting only to last like 7 minutes or something like that, and then to bolt out, the mood changed rather quickly, I would say. So and I think that changed a lot of people's opinions about him. Could he have done anything differently? That would maybe have changed the way that you felt about him leaving.
Yeah, I think the number one thing would just actually be delivering a heartfelt message to his team as he's departing. This isn't like a oh hey goodbye type situation. I just wanted there to be more of some actual like feelings and heartfulness, like I was talking about, of just recognizing the hard work that all of these guys have done in order for him to make this next move. I just felt like he was trying to break up with the bad ex or something, when
Yeah.
rather, yeah, him and the relationship with Notre Dame was always something good. There was, obviously, when you're out of school for so long and there's expectations, there's certain things that probably bother you as a head coach, but it's not like it was Brian Kelly versus Notre Dame. There was, it was a very good relationship. And then just to leave like that, it just felt like that he could have done more to recognize the program, the team, and kind of, everything that was done for him at the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah. Rashomon 18. I don't miss BK one bit. I wish he would have left about 4 years ago. And now,
This is people get, very worked up about the whole him leaving. And I reckon this is my only bad things about Brian Kelly are the way that he kind of, got into it with media towards the end and the way he left. But you have to recognize and respect what Brian Kelly did at Notre Dame. He came into a program and said he was going to make changes and that they would have success, and they did. He turned it around quickly. They went to a national championship. They went to playoffs. They played in big games. They had 10-win seasons. He did what he was supposed to at the University of Notre Dame, and I still think that people should appreciate and respect him as a coach, more than they should. How you feel about him as a person is one thing, but as a coach, he's a top level coach.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I get for some people it's hard to separate, but you can be a good coach and not be a great person. Just like you can be a great guy, great person, but not be a great coach.
Look at Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, it's exactly it. It works both ways, Yeah, that's. I mean, just look at Auburn dancing with the devil once again. So it got to catch Alabama though, right? But for years, like this comment right here, I wish he would have left about 4 years ago, and probably for the last 3 or 4 years, we were getting the comments like, let's say Brian Kelly decided to retire, at the end of the season, who would be the candidates to replace him? It's like, it's that, it's like without saying, I really want Brian Kelly to leave. That was basically the code for, I really want Brian Kelly to leave. Or, what they were really saying is, I hope that they get rid of Brian Kelly. They were, Notre Dame was never going to get rid of Brian Kelly as long as he kept winning the way that he did. And, they showed that, I think, a long time ago. But, so those were the kind of questions that we were getting over the last 2, 3, maybe 4 years. Who's the, who are the hot candidates? Who would you want if Brian Kelly did decide to retire or step away? And there was some of that talk as well. And that kind of surprised. Yeah. So like, going back to the original question, I guess, that the fact that he would pack up and leave Notre Dame for a place like LSU when there had sort of been some of this talk about maybe he's going to retire within the next 3 or 4 years, that kind of thing. And he just did get the Notre Dame all-time, wins record. What Stymie said, what we were just talking about, finishing out the season would have been better, but I can get behind ripping off the Band-Aid too. And, I think that everyone would like to see would have liked to see him at the very least stick around for another week and see if they were, whether or not they were going to be in the playoff picture. That didn't happen, as I think Stymie or Salty said before, bowl prep hadn't even begun because you were less than 48 hours removed from the Stanford game wrapping up on the West Coast. But it's never a perfect situation. You know, that's one of the biggest problems with college football is what's going on right now, hiring and firing season. You know, some of these schools had already cleared out, you know, like Nebraska obviously made their move back in September, and some of these other schools did as well. So, you know, they've had a lot of time to kind of sit back and go through their process, but other schools are just now getting into it. But because of the fact that you've got so long between the end of the regular season and your bowl games, it's never going to be a perfect situation because these schools, you know, like you've got signing day coming up, you want to keep your, you know, signing class together, all these different things. The next school that hires you wants you right away. So there's just no perfect way to do it. I'm not defending Brian Kelly because for his, you know, for him in particular, there are definitely ways he could have handled it better, but it's just for anyone, there's just no perfect way, I think, unless you're hiring someone, you know, like Matt Rule, who's coming back from the NFL, who had already been fired by the NFL.
I agree.
So do you feel any differently about Kelly now after seeing what he did at LSU this year?
You know, honestly, I didn't think that he would have this sort of success at LSU this quickly, to be honest with you. I mean, at mine, if they don't lose that game last week, they have very serious contentions of getting into the college football playoff if they end up beating Georgia in the SEC championship, right? So I didn't expect him to have the kind of success that he had right away. But it goes along with what I thought of him as always being a very solid coach. Anywhere he goes, he starts to win. I just didn't expect him to win as quickly at LSU. And I guess when he departed, you know, I guess I don't have any other feelings because when he left, I kind of just detached from it. You know, he was gone. Yeah. There was nothing that could be really done. I was just more interested in what kind of success that he would have at LSU and how quickly, you know, would he fall on his face and have a very average year? It looked like that when, you know, when they opened up against Florida State, but Florida State ended up being a good team. LSU ended up being a good team. You know, I was really honestly surprised by the fact that he had the success that he had based on kind of what people, you know, what we saw out of LSU and Ed Orgeron's last year. There was a lack of effort. There was a lack of, you know, defensive mentality, a lack of physicality, a lot of different things. And Brian Kelly really came in and changed things quicker than I thought he was going to.
Yeah, I think so as well. And like Stymie brings up a legitimate question. Is LSU that good or is it a down year for the
I mean, he
SEC?
beat Alabama. That's
anytime, you know, just ask Auburn. You know, that's why they made that hire, you know, escort service hotline or not. And, you know, that's why Auburn has who they have. And that's why they cleared house the way they cleared house, you know, from the top down out there to win to be able to beat Alabama. And Hugh Freeze beat Alabama a couple of times before, you know, so they're completely willing to do that. The one thing I would say, one, I'll give Brian Kelly credit because he did win. You know, I thought that just what you were saying, based on what Ed Orgeron had and the way that team was, the way the roster was when he took it over, I thought he was going to have a really rough first year. You know, as it ended up, they ended up being in college football playoff contention, but they also went out and hit the transfer portal, and that's, you know, one of the reasons he left is he can do things at LSU that he couldn't do at Notre Dame. You can't go out and raid the transfer portal en masse when you're at Notre Dame. You know, apparently you can at USC. You can't do it at Stanford, but you can at LSU. So between the fact that he thought that he was going into a situation that would be easier for him to recruit higher level athletes and the fact that he could go out and get guys through the transfer portal and get good right away, you know, his quarterback came from the transfer portal. And, you know, Notre Dame has to go the grad transfer route most of the time. Brandon Joseph is still the exception to the rule in terms of an undergrad transfer coming in here.
You know, I think another important aspect to look at is how do you feel 1 year removed about where Notre Dame sits, you know, with or without Brian Kelly. And I think how I feel about that ultimately is I honestly believe that Notre Dame is in a better situation with Marcus Freeman compared to Brian Kelly. Even though, you know, Brian Kelly had one win better than Marcus Freeman this season with, you know, a lot of the same kind of roster, I guess you could say, with what, you know, Brian Kelly left and what Marcus Freeman inherited. I think they're in a better situation because I think that they have someone who is more what's the best? Enthusiastic about the player-coach relationships. I think Marcus Freeman is tremendous when it comes to his relationships with his players compared to Brian Kelly. I think that Marcus Freeman is going to be a much better recruiter at an elite level. He's not going to make excuses for his shortcomings. Marcus Freeman always, throws himself under the bus first before he throws anyone else under the bus. I think that's very admirable about Marcus Freeman. And when you have to look at, Brian Kelly in his first couple of years, he went 7-5, 8-4, and then went into the national championship in year 3. I think we're going to see a very similar trend with Marcus Freeman. I'm not saying national championship, but I think in 3 years, Notre Dame will definitely be in the playoff. I think he's going to get his guys in here. I think we're going to see higher level recruits than what Brian Kelly could bring in. So, post Brian Kelly leaving, I think Notre Dame is in better shape. They have a younger coach who seems to care about, more important things than what Brian Kelly cared about. I think Brian Kelly cared about himself as a coach, and everything else kind of came second.
Two biggest differences between, they're more than just two, but between Kelly and Marcus Freeman, start with the personality that Marcus Freeman has and the way that he's able to connect with people, the way that he is more genuine with people, that is not, not everything is a transactional relationship like it was with Brian Kelly. There's a big gap in the coaching experience, obviously, basically 3 decades on Kelly's side, now 1 season on Marcus Freeman's side. You'll get coaching experience over time. I don't think Brian Kelly's personality overchanged with time, and his appetite, for being a better recruiter didn't change over time. He went out and got a Marcus Freeman and got guys that he thought who could do the recruiting for him, and obviously that was paying off in the 1 year that Marcus Freeman was under him. So well that it became obvious that this is the kind of guy that, and as we step back from this now, there were going to be some growing pains. We didn't know what the growing pains were going to look like, but the recruiting class is held together. It keeps getting stronger. They're getting close to the finish line now with the early signing period coming up. And just what you said, I think it's going to continue to get better. So I do think that ultimately Notre Dame is in a better place. It's just a matter of continuing to stack these big classes on top of big classes. It's not enough just to have one. Now you got to go out and get the next one as well. But I think that that's a task that Marcus Freeman and his guys are fully up to.
Yeah, I think the biggest example you can look at, and if you want to look at where recruiting is going and the level of athlete that's coming to the University of Notre Dame now under Marcus Freeman, Benjamin Morrison is Class A example of what I think we can expect at, positions outside of cornerback. He's going to bring in guys like this at wide receiver. He's going to bring in guys like this at linebacker. It's just a matter of time before we see these guys actually start working in, and getting into the system here. And that's what's ultimately the kind of not frustrating, but the thing that we have to be patient with is getting guys like Benjamin Morrison, through the cycle of Notre Dame, because I think that's the level of player that we're going to continue to see from now on.
Yeah. And you're going to have to get used to, as these, higher starred guys start coming in, you're going to have to get more used to the fact that the Michael Mayers of the world are going to be the rule as opposed to the exception. You're going to see more 3-year guys as opposed to 4-year and even 5-year guys. But that's good because the state of the program, I think, is going to be in a lot better shape. And, like Mr. 2.0 says, the season went as well as it did because Marcus Freeman works his tail off and was able to pack in about 1.5 to 2 years of head coaching learning into his first season. And, I think the point of that is the fact that Marcus Freeman, there were things that we saw Marcus Freeman, he was willing to be very self-reflective, look in the mirror all the time and say, okay, I need to get better at that. We saw growth from him as a head coach throughout the season when things could have easily fallen apart after the loss to Stanford. He just kept working. And, again, looking at himself, how do I make this better? How do I keep this thing together? And, obviously the USC game didn't go the way anyone wanted it to go. It's close.
He just wasn't there yet. USC was the better team, unfortunately.
That's right. Just not quite over the hump yet.
That's a big test for a first-year head coach to end your season against a playoff team and the guy that's probably going to win the Heisman. That's a tough ending to a first season.
I'll save the letter grade on this question from Brent, because that's one of the things that we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. We're going to do some evaluating of, position groups and coaches and, especially the new hires and stuff like that. It's really, again, I don't want to put a letter grade to this. I would say Al Golden, I'll tell you what, I'll save this here for just a second. Yeah. You want to save it for when we have that question in rapid fire and kind of.
Yeah, I actually was hoping that you would highlight the comment, because I remember that we are going to get into a little bit of that later. And I think that question in rapid fire is a good segue into kind of the overall picture of the defense this season.
Right. We'll come back to this. Because we got something in rapid, this, again, it ties into a question that we've got. So we'll save that for rapid fire. But I think there was good. There was bad. I think there was more good than bad. It's just that, sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. Jess, you haven't had the chance to comment. You did the Countdown to Kickoff show with Vince on Saturday. You haven't had the chance to comment since the Notre Dame USC game. So I know you thought that there was one major coaching decision that Lincoln Riley made that ultimately won the game for USC.
Yeah, so I was really hoping that I'd get a chance today to kind of briefly get into my thoughts about the game, because I didn't get to do the watch party. I didn't do the post-game show, and then obviously a lot of the bigger reactions on this show come on Monday, considering it's the first show after the weekend. And I got into it a little bit there. USC first and foremost was just the better team ultimately. Where they're at right now, Lincoln Riley has more experience than Marcus Freeman, has a quarterback that is probably going to be the finalist for the Heisman, if not win the Heisman. But early on in the game, as I was watching, I thought that Lincoln Riley made one major decision. I'm saying like the ultimate thing that won USC the game. This is just really what I thought. Yeah, I can hear you.
You're kind of chopping up a little bit there. You started chopping a little bit all of a sudden. So I just want to make sure that your connection's good, because I know you've got something good to say there, and I want people to be able to hear it.
Can we hear better now?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so just to recap a little bit of what I was getting into, if you heard me, you didn't hear me. I thought USC obviously was a better team. They had a Heisman finalist, if not the Heisman winner. But there was one thing that I noticed early in the game that Lincoln Riley did, and it was a deliberate move, and I think it helped USC, and ultimately it's what won USC the game, in my opinion, amongst other things. But Lincoln Riley made a conscious decision that his team was going to come out and run the ball when the whole focus was rightfully on Caleb Williams and their passing game and Addison at wide receiver, right? And all week, Lincoln Riley heard about how Notre Dame was going to run the ball on his defense because his defense wasn't very good. Well, look at what happened. USC was expected to pass the ball, and they came out and ran and established their run game early while simultaneously, stopping Notre Dame's run game. And then when they got a big enough lead, that's when they said, okay, we don't care if you open up the pass game and make it a track meet, because you're never going to catch us in a straight passing game. We know that you're going to win. If you want to go into a shootout in a track meet, we have the better quarterback, and we're going to, that's our bread and butter. We're going to be able to do that. And so Lincoln Riley's conscious decision to, that opening drive, they ran the ball for 33 yards and passed for 42, and 31 of those yards came on the the first third down on that play, where he extended the play and got, 31 yards. So Lincoln Riley, said, okay, we can't run the ball. Notre Dame's the better running team. We're going to establish the run and flip the script, right? He knew what Al Golden was going to come out and do. And then on the other hand, he said, okay, our defensive line isn't physical. Our defensive, we can't stop the run. And that's immediately what they did. They shut down Notre Dame's run and made them have to go into their passing game. And so to me, that was the ultimate, coaching decision, in my opinion, that flipped the game early, because when USC got that lead, there was no way that Notre Dame could go blow for blow and catch up to him in a passing attack. And I thought, the biggest thing was Notre Dame, USC goes out and gets a 7-0 lead. Notre Dame takes the ball and goes 8 yards on first and second down, and then they
3 and out. Yeah.
And 3 and out. And they run the ball on all 3 plays, and Lincoln Riley shuts it down. Now the third and 2 play call it was really frustrating to me, because Tommy Rees, you can't pack everything in, right? When teams know that you're supposed to stop the run and that's what you're trying to do, you can't pack everything in like that. You can't bring everyone to the line of scrimmage, and especially
because he even goes with 2 backs out there, which is like typically I'd be going, yeah, okay, here we go. But then he did just what you said. He packed it all in. USC has all 11 guys in the box on that play.
It's just you're asking to be stopped. And another thing he did is they're on the left boundary and they run to the field side. USC's strength on defense is their speed, and you're going to try to outspeed them to the field side. I mean, come on, you pack it in and then you try to run a speed option out to basically a speed option play out to the field side and wonder why you got stopped. I know there was a blown assignment by a tight end blocking, but my goodness, you can't pack everything in when everyone knows you're trying to run the ball. And so then USC gets a stop there, get a short field, and then they go up 10-0, right? And then again, Notre Dame comes out, they run 6 run plays for only 19 yards. And again, on 3rd down, QB sneak gets stuffed. And then 4th down, you run a play that you've showed on tape for the last 4 games. Like, run something new. You can't run the same play that you've shown on tape.
And you're talking about Mitchapalooza, of
yes,
course.
And when a team knows, again, you're trying to run the ball on a short yardage situation, you can't be doing stuff that you've shown before.
About this last night. It wasn't just 4th and inches or 4th and a half yard. It was 4th and a long yard.
Yes.
And that's what you decide to do, where, again, you're packing everybody in the box and you're running a play that everyone has seen. It would have been the perfect time to, instead of Mitchell Evans runs it up the gut, he does like the Tim Tebow where he pulls it out and he's doing a little pop pass, because I think it was Jaden Thomas that was sitting on the left end there who really didn't even block anybody. He just kind of jumped on the pile at the end. You could have just a free release, and he might have even scored on that thing because there was no safety help back there.
Exactly. So that's what I was most frustrated with was, Notre Dame obviously was that's their bread and butter. They're gonna run the ball. Lincoln Riley shut it down, and then he flipped the script and said, okay, my team is going to run the ball on you, and we're going to control the physicality and all those things. So I just thought that, Notre Dame did overall, it was a well game. Like, you look at the stats and things, a lot of similar numbers, but the numbers that were different is Notre Dame had 101 rushing yards and USC had 204 rushing yards. That's what won the game. Lincoln Riley flipped the script and said, we're going to run the ball and we're going to shut down your run game. 2 things that no one thought that USC could do that week.
And again, we touched on this last night, but, back to Brent's comments and some of the other stuff that people have been saying, that was the biggest to me, because, like, I'll tie this in to what I was going to kind of bring up. Some people watched our show on YouTube last night, and there were a couple comments, afterwards saying that we blamed Drew Pyne for the loss. More than one comment saying we blamed Drew Pyne. Now, that's not even close to what Vince and I, thought we said yesterday. That's not even close. So I don't know specifically what people heard that made them believe that, but because, like, we mentioned, hey, if you switched quarterbacks on the teams, Notre Dame is going to win that game. So if you're taking that to mean we're blaming Drew Pyne for the loss, that that's not even remotely what I said. I think it's more on the defense and the lack of adjustments that Al Golden made, but at the same time, the 2 plays that you brought up, the 3 and out and the, jet sweep, whatever you called that, to Logan Diggs, when, if you're going to run that play, at the very least should have been Chris Tyree with the ball in his hands and not Logan Diggs. And then the Mitchapalooza thing, like, those 2 plays, getting stopped in those situations, going 3 and out right after USC came out and did all this misdirection and marched right downfield, scored a touchdown. Now, the defense did hold USC to a field goal after they go 3 and out on their opening drive. So I will give them that. And, there were times, the secondary played really well, but the fact that they were never able to adjust to that running game, I completely agree. But the 3 and out on your opening drive after USC has just scored, and then coming up short on 4th and 1 with Mitchapalooza using that same play again, just going back to the well again and again and again. I thought that those 2 results were also, played just as big a part in the result of the game ultimately.
Yeah, I hate to be dramatic, but when they got stopped on that 3rd down and got stopped on the 4th down, I thought that USC's chances to win were about 90%. There's just, when they get out to that big of a lead and what Notre Dame's offense wants to do, you're not going to catch up to USC. I'm sorry. Like, Caleb Williams threw 3 interceptions all season. You're not going to catch up to him. And I thought that Roshaman brought up a really good point. There was no creativity again from Tommy Rees on these short down situations. And look at what Lincoln Riley did on that first drive. How many different little plays do we see? That end around play where Caleb Williams had to, get offensive pass interference in the end zone. It's still a play that they hadn't shown yet. There was creativity. There was, Addison taking like some sort of jet sweep. There was so much more creativity between Lincoln Riley's first drive and Tommy Rees's first drive.
Man, people are slinging it in here tonight with with the back and forth on who's to blame for what and everything else. But yeah, so again, I guess it is what it is at this point, but there are blaming Drew Pyne was the last thing that we were trying to do last night. Was that Drew? Do you think it was Drew Pyne's best game?
I would take Drew Pyne.
The fact that you have some hesitation means that I think we're going to be on the same page with this.
It's not, because I know his passing numbers were great. He had like 318 passing yards and only 2 or 3 incompletions. But the fact of the matter is he made the most crucial plays in his turnovers in the most crucial part of the game. They were driving down with that first drive after the second half, and he fumbled that ball. And if you score any sort of points on that instead of fumbling, especially a touchdown, it's a huge momentum shift. And then USC takes that turnover and goes for a touchdown themselves. And then again, towards the end, when you're trying to, get some sort of comeback in, you turn the ball over again with the interception. And it's like, I know that I would take his Clemson game over that USC game. And his passing numbers were nowhere near the same in the Clemson game, but he controlled the offense. He didn't turn the ball over. And unfortunately, he turned the ball over when it mattered most against USC.
Yes. And, like if you were playing fantasy football, Drew Pyne had a nice fantasy football game, right? He had a good response after, the drive after the fumble. They drove for a touchdown that ended with Deion Colsey's first touchdown. As Luck says, numbers are deceiving, or at least they can be deceiving. He did a good job, did a lot of really good things, probably 98% of the night. Played a really good game, but he also had the 2 turnovers. And both of those turnovers were completely on him. There is no way around it. And I was thinking about this today. I was a high school wrestler. I remember my junior year, I'm wrestling this guy. He's one of the top guys in our weight class in the state. And I am beating this guy from the start of the match till midway through the third quarter. In virtually the entire match, I'm controlling this thing. It is my match against this guy. Then midway through the third period, I make a mistake. Next thing I know, boom, I'm on my back. That's the match. Game over. I lose after I just dominated this guy for basically the entire, for all but about a minute of this match. And I'm walking off the mat. I'm pissed off. My coach grabs me and he says, that was the best match that you've wrestled all year, right up until the end. And well, guess what? The end counts. The end is part. The mistake is still part of the match, of the game, of whatever, you call it, whatever sport you happen to play. You can be good for 99% of the time, but if one mistake ultimately ends up being a crucial mistake, then you can't say it's his best. Again, now I'm not blaming Drew Pyne for the loss because there were a lot of other factors that go into the end result. Those 2 turnovers had an impact on the game. And so you can say that he had a great completion percentage, which he did. You can say he had a career high passing yards, which he did. But one of his 3 incompletions was an interception. So it's not just 23 for 26. One of those also directly gave the other team the ball. And fumbles don't show up in the stats, of course. And that's something that I've always thought, that fumbles, that should be an official stat for offensive players. It shouldn't just be a team stat. You should know where where the fumbles come from. So, I'll say he had a really good statistical day, but I can't call it his best game because those 2 turnovers impacted the game. Again, I'm not putting it on him saying they cost them the game, but they impacted the game. If he had, in the end, led Notre Dame to a comeback win after those turnovers, that negates
It's
some of
all
those
forgotten.
turnovers, then maybe I feel differently about it. But you're out there to win. So I can't say with those two kind of costly mistakes, I can't say that it's his best game because it's a really good game that ended in a loss. That's all it is. Just like Charlie Weiss, 17 years ago, he's still the head coach that lost the Bush push game. Like he said afterwards, I'm still the head coach of the team that lost one of the greatest games that you'll ever see. And that's what he is 17 years later. He's still the coach that lost that game. So I can't call it his best.
Exactly. And, Brent, sorry, I want to get to another comment that I saw here, and it was from Brent Smith, a little bit up. And it says, Notre Dame should have begun the game passing the ball, a balanced attack. That's exactly what I was talking about in the difference that Lincoln Riley did. He flipped the script and he let his run game open up what's the better part of his offense in the pass game. I thought Notre Dame should have done the same thing and came out and attacked with the pass game and let their run game naturally, open up as the game went on, because USC has proven that their secondary is not good. These are high scoring games. A lot of teams rack up the passing yards. I would have liked to see Notre Dame do the same thing. They were expected to run the ball. I would have liked to see Notre Dame come out and pass the ball and then let that open up the rest of their game, similar to what USC did with the run and, subsequently the pass game.
Yeah. As Brent said, 14 points off turnovers. That's,
that was it.
Yeah. It's, again, it's a good performance. It's a good fantasy football performance, but I can't call it his best game, just the way the game ended up at the end. Jess, are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready for rapid fire. I think
all right.
we need a little relief now.
We've got plenty tonight, and I'm curious to see if we get any input from our listeners on this first question. Fill in the blank. The anniversary of Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame for LSU should be called blank going forward.
Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame for LSU should be called an opportunity going forward because of what we just talked about previously. An opportunity for the program to reach new heights and get to a level that we've all been wanting, right? The national championship. I believe with Marcus Freeman that Notre Dame has a better chance at winning the national championship than they did with Brian Kelly. Are we set back maybe a couple years or a year or two? Sure, because that's accustomed to any time a new coaching staff comes through. And like we talked about, getting his recruits in there, getting his guys, his cycle going. I think that it is an opportunity to reach new heights compared to when Brian Kelly was here.
So it's opportunity to reach new heights day. Is that what Jesse is calling it?
Yes. I forgot that there was a day at the end of there.
Yeah, exactly. We could call it like Kelly's run, BK Bolt's day or something like that. Brian's Baton Rouge Bolt. Like if you're Dom Meriwether, you could call it the negative burnt ends day or something like that. Like I'll never get my burnt ends back.
T-Mac says blessing day. That could fit in. It's a blessing because we're gonna get to new, better heights.
VSB, Victory in South Bend Day from Tommy. That's not a bad one either. Or just call it Freeman Era Day, right? Or Freeman Day. Or, remember the hashtag that was going around that week?
Free day.
Hashtag Freeman Era. It's, Kelly left. It brought you the Freeman Era. So just call it that. But VSB Day or VND Day, that's not bad either. So I would just go with Freeman Era Day, something along those lines. All right. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. Here's something you've brought up before on this show and some hard data now to go along with it. So Notre Dame's red zone defense ranks 130th out of 131 teams in the nation. This is red zone defense. They have allowed touchdowns 78.8% of the times that teams have gotten into the red zone. But at the same time, opponents only have gotten into the red zone 33 times this season, which ranks number 15 in the nation. And again, this is something you brought up, Jesse. They're not good keeping teams out of the end zone once they get into the red zone, but they're actually pretty good for the most part at keeping teams out of the red zone. So, Mr. Defense, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I remember going through this probably like 6 weeks ago, being very frustrated because all people wanted to talk about or associate with Golden's defense was this red zone rate, that someone brought up, and so it was very frustrating because yeah, that stat is bad. You don't, of course, I want you don't want that to be 130 out of 131, and you would like to see that percentage drop. But at the same time, he still has a good defense because teams weren't getting to the red zone often. It was just, when they did get there, for whatever reason, they were scoring touchdowns. And so for me, I am very satisfied with being number 15 in the country of, teams getting into the red zone. I would just like to see that red zone number come down a little bit, even if teams aren't getting there very often, I guess. Is like that number still isn't good, but the fact that teams don't get into the red zone very often is
Right.
still a very good stat in my
Still a
opinion.
good sign. And it goes to the fact that, like, even USC, they scored 38 points, but Notre Dame held them below their scoring average. I think it was every game this season, Notre Dame held teams below their scoring average all season long. And it was, in some cases, pretty considerable. So the defense was actually pretty good. It's just like, if you go back again to the USC game, and I don't know how much of this plays into these specific stats that we're talking about with the red zone, the lack of being able to adjust when teams are having some success, like what they had the other night. Like, he made a preemptive move by going with that 3-3-5 defense the other night. And Lincoln Riley and USC said, okay, you're going to give us a 3-man front. We're going to attack it. And they end up running for 204 yards. Where was the adjustment that came after that? Where was the adjustment in the second half against Navy, for example? Like, there have been good, there have been bad, but where was the, like, it's really baffling to me. One of the conundrums, I think, of looking at this Al Golden defense, because there was a lot of good, but there was just enough bad that it leaves you a little bit perplexed, leaves you wondering a little bit exactly what it is.
Yeah, so here's how I'm going to put it in big term pictures. Out of the 12 games this season, Notre Dame won 8 of them. They obviously lost 4. Of those 4 losses, I would say that the defense is to blame in one of them, and that's the USC game. They didn't lose to Ohio State because of their defense. They didn't
Right.
lose to Marshall and Stanford because of their defense. They only lost, in my opinion.
Hold it. Let's go back to Marshall, though. With when they had a
third
chance
down
to
in
get
their
Marshall,
own territory. I
when
get
they've got a
that.
chance to get Marshall off the field, and it turns into what, a 95, 96-yard touchdown drive. That's
I guess what I'm trying
that
to
was a
say is
problem.
I'm leaning towards, and most of their losses, I would say that it was offensive production. I think that you can squarely blame the defense for one game, and that's USC. And if that, as a defensive coordinator, I will take that. I will, that's a pretty solid defense in my opinion. And the fact that that one loss was, again, against a very high-powered offense, a Heisman, a guy who's probably going to win the Heisman. I'm not trying to make excuses, but Golden had a lot that he was working up against USC, but like you said, there had to be some sort of, you needed to see at least signs or efforts of trying to change things. There was just not enough in-game adjustments.
Yeah, and like Anthony says, they still only gave up 19 points to Marshall. But again, it's kind of like what I was just talking about. Like, they played relatively well for a good chunk of the game, but then when the game was on the line and you really needed to step up, 90-plus yard touchdown drive. So that's, you got to get off the field on 3rd and long. That's basically what it comes down to. They get off the field on 3rd and long, they probably walk out of there with a win. And we're talking about a completely different topic today.
Yeah, but then again, on the flip side for me is, if you told me that the offense needed just 20 points to beat Marshall, it's how can't you score 20 points against Marshall? It's just it's hard to look at it from both sides.
Andrew's asking what we think about Freeman calling the defense next season, and he's really taken, more a CEO approach to this whole thing. Letting off his offensive coordinator do his thing, letting his defensive coordinator doing his thing, even though he was just obviously defensive coach. But like, when he was talking about Lincoln Riley last week, Lincoln Riley is obviously a head coach, but he was talking about what a great offensive coordinator Lincoln Riley also is. So I get, you've brought in this guy, Al Golden, who's a former head coach himself. He's got a lot of NFL experience, and, he's got a lot of experience in general. I get not wanting to sort of step on his toes, but at the same time, Marcus Freeman's strength is defense, and like his defenses throughout the course of last season, there were some mistakes early where they gave up some big plays. I would not shoot down the idea myself. I don't know. I'll be really curious to see, like, as Marcus Freeman evaluates everything, and I'm sure he's going to evaluate everything if he thinks that is a direction he needs to go next year. I wouldn't be against it, but
there's a couple things on that. Is I like that the approach that he took this season, letting his coordinators kind of come to him when he needed to, provide the support of what he needed. But at the same time, you got to realize that Golden is in his first year too. He has been out of the college game for a little bit. The game is different between college and NFL, and what you can do schematically and what you're trying to accomplish. So I think if we continue to maybe see some of the same issues again next season, then yeah, there is a potential, for Freeman to step in. But I thought Irish in Ohio made a good point. I think Freeman should get back with the linebackers. I think that's his bread and butter. We saw a very big weakness this year at linebackers. I think that was that was obviously, their biggest weakness on defense. And I would like to see Marcus Freeman with a more of an input with these linebackers, and especially because it's so young. This group is going to be so raw. There's a lot of talent there, and I'd like to see Marcus Freeman get his hands in that a little bit.
And I mean, they had two guys coaching them. They brought in James Laurinaitis, and Al Golden was the linebackers coach as well. And they still, again, it is some of the reason because of, like some of these guys are limited athletically in different ways versus you've got these young guys who have a lot more upside coming up behind them. But these front end guys are all going to be here most likely next year versus, so is it that versus was there a lot on their plate? I thought the linebacker play got better over the course of the year, but there were still definite areas for improvement for them.
Yes, definitely.
Next question. Does David Shaw's decision to step down at Stanford make you look at Notre Dame's season any differently?
No, I think that Shaw has been on a drought now for the last 3 or 4 years. After he replaced Harbaugh, he had, Stanford was good. He kind of continued or picked up where Harbaugh left off, but he's really struggled the last 3 or 4 years. And so, whether or not Shaw resigns or not, that's just an ugly loss to a bad Stanford team. But he's been struggling now for a couple of years. This isn't just a 1-year thing or 2-year thing. This is an accumulation of his last 3 or 4 or 5 years, and it doesn't really have any effect, in my opinion.
See, but that's why, to me, it does make me kind of go, just, the Stanford loss is what it is at this point. Before USC, that was the last loss that they had. They had done pretty well for a while, but it's one thing to be 8-4, and we know the losses: Marshall, Stanford, and then Ohio State and USC. But as much as losing to Marshall stinks, at least Marshall ended up going 8-4. They're still a fairly average group of 5 team, but at least they're bowl eligible, and they ended up with 8 wins this season. They went through a valley there for a while, losing those 4 games. And so, to Tommy Gunn's point, no, it's still a disappointment. And that's kind of part of my point. It's like, to me, it stings even more because, okay, yeah, Marshall had 20 transfers. It was early in the season, before the Notre Dame's offensive line came together, new head coach, all that stuff. Okay, whatever. But what makes me look at things a little bit differently with Stanford now is like they take even fewer transfers than Notre Dame. They had lost 11 straight games to Power 5 teams, and they only won one more game after beating Notre Dame. That was the next week when they beat Arizona State, who also fired their head coach this season. So, they finished with their 3rd losing season in 4 years. Despite all that, David Shaw wasn't going to get fired. He was going to get to keep his job, apparently, if he wanted it, but he waves the flag, no mas, I'm done, I'm out of here. And so, like, that's one of the teams that you lost to. Like, to me, it just it's still a head scratcher. Again, they were able to recover and get better after that, but it's like, how on earth you lost that game? Because now, like, how much this matters, I don't know. But if they had won that game, they're 9-3 right now. With a bowl game coming up, they've still got a chance at another double-digit win season. That's out the window right now. Again, how much that matters, I don't know. It's probably, relatively just a feather in your cap. But it's just so confounding and makes it even more frustrating to know that of all the things that did go well, a pretty good record against ranked teams. You're only outside of Marshall and Stanford, you lost to a couple top 5 teams. That's great, but that was the team that you lost to a guy who ultimately jumped off a sinking ship at the end of the season. That's a little bit distressing still. Again, they played better since then, but it's still distressing that's one of the teams that you ended up losing to, I think.
Definitely. I think it does make it sting just a little bit more.
Yeah. So this next one, I saw this the other day and I had to bring this up. So the radio voice of Arkansas football, Chuck Barrett, he took some shots at Missouri last week, mostly talking about the lack of quality in their facilities in comparison to Arkansas. He said, quote, "I don't think they take their sports seriously. I don't think it just means more. They act like they're a little bit better than those of us in the Southern Corridor. I've just never cared for them," end quote. So after the game, Missouri beats Arkansas, and Missouri head coach Eli Drinkwitz says, quote, "Anybody sees Chuck Barrett, ask him how our trenches were," end quote. So what do you think of this, Jess?
I don't understand why people run their mouths before the event is actually over, right? Like, say what you want to say after it's over, but when you make comments like this, you're just giving people receipts to just bury you after the game. And whether or not, Missouri takes football as seriously as Arkansas, that's a here nor there conversation. But I just don't think it's really in people like that's position to be kind of making those shots, because you're only setting yourself up for if things go bad, right? Like, of course, if you win, no one's going to say anything. But when you say something like that and you lose, you just give the other guy ammunition to send it right back at you. And you look even stupider because for the reason that, they lost. And then so it becomes of, okay, Arkansas, we don't take football as serious, or sorry, Missouri, we don't take football as seriously as Arkansas, but we just beat you. So what does that say? Who's really taking the football seriously? So I just wish that people would save their comments for when the game is actually over, or when things have actually concluded.
I'm surprised that Barrett said what he said, but it's also like with Eli Drinkwitz, this guy is interesting because, like, I remember seeing him at SEC media days, and he gets up there and he's got his little glasses, it's like his wire rim glasses on. He looks like a professor up there. He doesn't look like a football coach, but then you see him on the sidelines, and this guy is like, he's animated, he's going at it, he's going after people and the whole thing. But why the rabbit ears, Eli Drinkwitz? That's what I want to know about. Why the rabbit ears? Why do you care what the Arkansas radio announcer is saying? And why are you bringing it up in your post-game press conference? Like, your jab is at the Arkansas radio announcer.
It's like he was waiting all game for that.
Yeah. It's like that was the motivation, so we can throw it back at the Arkansas radio announcer. So I guess it just goes to show some of these guys will tell you that they don't listen, they don't read, the stuff, whatever, but they do.
It gets to them. Just ask Lane Kiffin. I think Lane Kiffin sees everything.
Oh yeah, sure. For sure. If he would put down the Twitter, he wouldn't see as much.
Right. Exactly.
Storm, I guess. So in last night's loss to the Steelers, did you watch that game, Steelers-Colts, last night?
Watched the whole thing, actually.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about here. Colts get the ball back, their own 7-yard line, 3:52 to play, all 3 timeouts left. They're down by a touchdown. After a Matt Ryan 14-yard scramble with under a minute to play, the Colts lose 25 seconds because Jeff Saturday doesn't call a timeout. The game ends with the Colts at the Steelers 26. They've got 2 timeouts left at the end of the game. because they didn't use him. After the game Saturday says, I thought we had plenty of time. I wasn't really concerned. So, Jess, how concerned should Colts fans be about having Saturday as their coach right now?
I think there shouldn't be a lot of concern because first and foremost, they got rid of their head coach in the middle of the season, and that was largely because of the abundance of talent they had and the shot that they thought that they had at winning the division. And unfortunately, they were underperforming, and they bring in Saturday. And if I'm not mistaken, he already had 2 wins as a head coach. So it's like I don't think that people should be relatively concerned about it because one, he's an interim, and two, he's on a better track record than the guy that started the season ahead of him. And I think another important aspect of this is one, I see the rationale for why he didn't take the time out. He thought that he had the Steelers defense reeling and that he didn't want to take the time out and give the Steelers the opportunity to sub out defensively. And he didn't want to give them a line change. And so I understand those things. And I thought Troy Aikman brought up another great point last night. And afterwards talking to Scott Van Pelt, it's not just a Jeff Saturday decision. He's got guys in the press box who are solely dedicated to clock management and telling him when he shouldn't take a timeout. And so we don't know if they were telling him to take a timeout and he point blank said no, or if they were all on the same page of we're just going to let this roll. And, we want to keep the Steelers kind of reeling here because of they were not ripping off, but they were moving the ball and they just didn't want to give the Steelers a breather or the chance to kind of switch guys out. So I'm not making excuses. I still think that there should have been a timeout taken, but I can see the other side of where things were going in that situation.
25 seconds is a lot of time to let run off the clock when you've got all your timeouts remaining. Because I think, wasn't it on the next play, like after the next play, they ended up taking because there was a sack that Ryan took as well where they didn't take a timeout. So like, you can talk about having them reeling, but you were kind of reeling a little bit yourself. Like maybe you could have stood to regroup. It just seems like, this is a guy again who, everyone, Jim Irsay on down started patting themselves on the back after he went out and beat the Raiders in his first game. And just like I said, I mean, that's no accomplishment. Josh McDaniels is not a good head coach and the Raiders are not a good team. It's like you had 2 bad teams playing. Somebody had to win, and teams get up when they have an interim coach. You've seen it quite a bit. The Carolina Panthers, after Rule got fired, they went out and won a game or two afterwards. It's like, and then all of a sudden that emotion kind of dies off and you've got what you got. This just seems like basic mistakes made by an inexperienced coach. And, he can say that he wasn't worried about it and all that, but it just, to leave a game like that, 26 yards shy of the end zone with 2 timeouts in your pocket, you don't get to use them down the road. And I don't know. It seemed to me like a big mistake, like a big rookie mistake that he made. Fill in the blank. It's blank that the Dallas Cowboys versus New York Giants drew an audience of 42 million on Thanksgiving Day. Biggest viewership for a regular season game ever.
Vince and I got into this a little bit, similar question on Saturday in the pregame show. And so I'm hoping that we have some people out there that either, one, listen and can hear me say this again, or two, are going to be hearing this for the first time. Anytime the Cowboys play and it gets high viewership, it's expected because they are America's team, everybody. This isn't brand new. This is who continues to set the records every time, the Dallas Cowboys. It's expected at this point that these guys are going to be the team that everyone wants to watch. And that's because you either love the Cowboys or you hate the Cowboys. So you're tuning in because you're a diehard fan, or you'd like to see the Cowboys lose because you hate the Cowboys. But again, it all comes back to them being America's team. And that's why they get the viewership. That's why they get, they're going to be playing the Colts on Sunday Night Football this week. They're always in prime time because they know, the networks know who's going to set these viewership records. It's the Dallas Cowboys.
And America gets the Colts in primetime 2 weeks in a row. We'll sit here and we'll pump the Cowboys, and something stupid will happen next week. But specific to Cowboys and Giants, it's like perfect storm. Thanksgiving, everyone's off. It's a traditional.
It's the 4 o'clock game. Everyone's got their food in them.
On Thanksgiving, everyone's watching football anyway, and then you throw in America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. And then you throw in the number 1 media market in the country, New York, and both teams, both teams are playing for something right now. They're both playoff teams as of right now. It probably
The
means we're going to get
NFC
more of it in the
East.
future. Like,
The
remember when it
NFC
seemed like
East.
every year the Cowboys and Giants would play on Sunday night to open the season? Like,
Yes.
you get them early on while they're both good and you get good ratings and all that, So I'd be shocked if we don't see like Cowboys Giants every third or fourth year on Thanksgiving going forward. I would be completely shocked.
Exactly.
So, Jess, there were a lot of issues at the Las Vegas Invitation women's basketball tournament over the weekend. Did you see this stuff on Twitter and kind of floating
No,
around
I
there?
didn't.
So, one of the basic things, there were no towels at the games for players. They told teams or teams were advised to bring their own towels down from their hotel rooms at the casino they were staying in. And they set up a basketball court in a hotel conference room to play games. And they had like folding chairs set up, like ground level, no scoreboard, the whole thing. My question, I guess, to you, and you can comment on, just this setup as well if you want. What's the worst playing conditions that you've ever seen or played in?
There's one situation that came to mind. I always thought Mishawaka's field in high school was kept poorly. Their field, and we always played them when it rained, so it flooded, so that doesn't help. But it was
Yeah.
just a bad grass field, and it never felt really safe to play on, and always advantageous to the team that's running a downhill triple option as you're trying to get your footing in a very crappy field. So I would say that. And then when I was in college, we played at a school called St. Xavier in Illinois. And their field, they had this turf field, but it might as well just been like a cinder block. Their turf was really old. The pellets weren't, it wasn't a turf field. It felt like you were on like a very thin layer of concrete. And so every time, you were cautious of getting burns and cuts and all kinds. It wasn't a good playing field. So I think of those two things when I think of just playing in bad conditions. But I also want to say, I thought we were over this in the women's college basketball and women's sports in general after the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago. So it's really sad and frustrating that we continue to see issues like this happen, and we don't really see it ever happen on the men's side. So that's another comment I wanted to get in there.
No, I mean, that's exactly right. Just like the whole stuff with the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago, you would never see men's basketball teams asked to play in the same conditions. You would never see that happen. But that's what happened out there in Vegas. So it's really, like Indiana was one of the teams out there, and they're a freaking top 5 team right now. To your point about the Mishawaka field, I don't know if it'll make you happy or sad to know that it's no better now than it was then.
I mean, there's a reason why. It's a legit
that,
advantage to them. It's an advantage.
Like he's, a lot of these schools in the area are going to turf, and he would love to have some turf out there on his field. But instead, unfortunately, there's sand spots and those kind of things. So the worst that I saw because I don't think from a playing standpoint, there's nothing that stands out. But when I was doing Notre Dame baseball games a few years back, they went to Mississippi Valley State one year, and they played one of the games at like this really, really old, like a stadium that was probably built literally in the 1920s or 30s, but it hadn't been used for several years. And when the team showed up to practice the day before, there were prison crews out on the field, with like those, those, I don't know what you call it. It's like the blades that you see where like they swing the blade and they're cutting the, like the long grass with the, like with like a rod, with the blade attached to it. They're like literally, they had inmates out on work duty trying to get this field in condition to play. The grandstand was a mess. The field itself was a mess. So that was one of the old Dave Schrag specials, that trip to Mississippi Valley State.
So, I remember that actually. I remember you telling me about it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's been a little while. Salty wants you to whiteboard all the which coaching candidates were talked to and when and how far it went before Marcus Freeman was hired. That's something Vince and I talked about.
I think it was just one person. So, I thought it was just Freeman and Freeman only.
No, it was fickle. We talked a little bit about that
Oh, yeah,
yesterday.
that's right.
Fickle.
Okay.
But again, how deep it went, I don't know, but there was interest. And then Rashaman, is that Rashaman? Is that how you say it? Nice job for Notre Dame Women's Radio. We listened Saturday for a little bit. Thank you. Some big games coming up this week. That's right. Maryland on Thursday, ACC Big Ten Challenge, and then UConn coming up Sunday. Wants to know if I need a color guy. Might have a color person with me for this weekend, but I do appreciate the offer. Well, I think that's going to do it for tonight, Jess. We've bored through it all. Tomorrow, of course, is mailbag day, so everyone's welcome to bring your questions in tomorrow. By the way, sling blades. There you go. That's right. Some of them French fried potatoes and sling blade. That's right. Thanks, Johnny S. Starting Friday, Vince and Jesse and I are going to do a special weekend edition of Rapid Fire. So we're going to start doing that as of this week. We're going to start it on Friday. I don't think it's going to be a live show, but we're gonna do it, kind of record it in the afternoon, and we'll have it for you on Friday for your weekend listening. So that'll be the next time we get a chance to talk with you. Jess?
There was a question. Are Vince and Brian doing a reveal show tonight with the latest college football rankings? Do you know?
I think so, but no one really, because I saw like the question about upon further review, and no one has filled me in on what is or isn't happening in the last couple days.
You've been out of the country, so
yeah, I think that there is supposed to be a show tonight. I would assume there is going to be, because they've done one every week when the rankings are released. So I believe there's still going to be one. So that's as far as I can commit. All right. Well, thanks for being with us tonight. Hit the like button on your way out. If you would, subscribe, rate, review, all that great stuff, helping out Irish Breakdown. Great to talk to you. We will talk to you tomorrow with the Mailbag Show on IB Nation Sports Talk.